All right, today we are going to be carving some paddles out of Western red cedar. So your first step is to find a solid board that you are going to be working with. This is, like I said, red cedar. It's got a pretty tight grain. It's not quite quarter sawn, but pretty tight grain and free of knots. You don't want to have a knot right in the middle of your paddle if it's something small, or if it is not where your paddle is going to be on the board, so an area that's going to get cut away, that's fine. Your next step is to make a pattern. I have one here that I made out of just a paper bag. Does not have to be fancy. Corrugated cardboard works well too. So you're going to just line this up. This is a 2x6, so my paddle will end up being just under 6 inches wide, and a lot of that 2 inches is going to get carved away everywhere except for the handle. So you're going to put that in place and then just trace around the outside. So here is a template that I already traced, and as I mentioned, you don't want any knots interfering. This board does have a couple of them, but they're actually going to get cut off or carved away, so those shouldn't be a problem. There's one little one up here that'll just be an interesting feature in the handle. So our next step is to cut these out. We're going to use a bandsaw and just stay as close to your line as you can. Kind of a rough cut is all right, because most of that will be fine-tuned during the carving process. All right, so these are cut out on the bandsaw. We've got some nice little caveman paddles here. We're going to start carving them. These are the tools that you're going to use. First of all, just some clamps to clamp them down nice and solidly if you're trying to hold it and carve. At the same time, it's going to be really difficult, so just find a nice surface to clamp those onto. Then we have just a regular hand plane. This is really good for removing the bulk of the material, especially on the flat part of the blade and at the beginning of the carving process. Once you get down a little bit more, you're going to use a spokeshave. This is really good for getting kind of finer angles and those tighter corners too, like as you get through this part of the paddle or up by the handle, and you just want more refined work than the hand plane is going to do. Spokeshave is really critical for that. I also have a really rough file. This is just good for some of the, again, rough removal of material in some of the corners here where it's hard to get with the hand plane, but before you're ready for the spokeshave. It's not critical, but it is a helpful tool. All right, the next thing you're going to do is grab a square and a Sharpie and use this to guide yourself doing a line along the very center of the edge of the paddle. You can see here we're on the edge. I'm going to do this freehand because I don't have enough hands to hold the phone. So you're going to take your square and just draw a line right down the middle all the way around your paddle. So it's going to end up looking like this. This is the one that I already did. Again, going along the edge in the very center. The reason for that is as you carve from each side, you want to make sure your paddle is staying symmetrical, so you can work your way carving from each side down to the line, so it doesn't end up lopsided. I sometimes redraw my line too if it gets carved away. You can always stop anywhere in the process just to re-sketch that line on to make sure that your paddle is coming out evenly. All right, so I have the paddle clamped down solidly. You're going to take the hand plane first, and there's no one right way to do this, but I like to work on the blade of the paddle first, keeping all of your material here up at the top of the blade, and then taking it down to about a 1/2 inch at the other end. So what I like to do sometimes is add an additional set of lines. These are spaced about a 1/2 inch. That's where I'm trying to cut my material down to. So you'll just work at an even plane all the way down, again from the top of the blade to the tip. Just gradually working down and leaving this about a 1/2 inch thickness. You don't want to be any thinner than that, because as you clean it up and shape the paddle more, that'll get too thin. So you'll take your hand plane and just work your way in nice even strokes. Sometimes going crosswise helps, sometimes straight down. Just kind of find the grain of the piece of wood that you're working on, and you may find working one direction kind of helps out better, but you want to make sure you're switching back and forth so that both sides are being cut away evenly. When I think I'm getting close, I like to flip it over and work from the other side just to make sure everything is coming out symmetrically. All right, so now both sides of the paddle blade are shaved down evenly to about 1/2 inch at the tip. And now we're going to carve a different direction and taper down these sides. So I put a line down the center of each side here, and starting from the center point, we're going to fade down. Now you'll still want to plane with the grain for the most part. A little bit of an angle is okay, but tapering down from the middle. So at the tip of the paddle, that will be a fairly mellow gradient here. It won't taper down much, just a little bit of ridge in the middle just to support the paddle and give it some rigidity and strength there. And then up towards the top, all of this is going to get a little bit thinner, but it's going to mostly stay the same thickness, so it'll be a more pronounced ridge. And then as we fade down toward the edge of the blade, that will get to that 1/2 inch measurement too. So if you want to put a 1/2 inch measurement here, 1/4 inch on either side of this line as a guide, or kind of eyeball it, but the goal will be that you've got about this same thickness all the way around the edge of the blade with that thicker ridge in the middle. All right, so now the blade is shaved down. We've got a bit of a ridge at the top, no ridge at the bottom. You can see from the end it's about the same thickness all the way across, and then all the way around the edge we've got about the same thickness until we get up towards the handle. So this is still pretty rough. That'll come out with maybe a little more hand plane and some spokeshave work. It's closed for now. It's pretty thin, so when we clamp this down, we're going to use some rags so that we're not putting dents into the wood, which there's really not enough material to remove to take those out later. So just some rags to protect that since it's soft wood. So now we're going to work on the kind of the shaft of the paddle for a while. Same thing, we're going to use the hand plane to take off the bulk of the material first. You want this probably going to take about a 1/4 inch off each side, as well as rounding it, so it's going to get smaller so it's comfortable to reach your hand around. So we'll clamp down the blade of the paddle and work one end and then flip it around and work the other end again with the hand plane, just to start by rounding it off and then making it a little bit smaller as well. Alright, so now the shaft of the paddle is roughly round and about the size you want it to be. It's going to get a little smaller as we refine it, and obviously smoother too. We're going to work on the handle next. So you still got your line down the middle so you can work towards center. This is really up to what feels right when you're hanging on to it. This is obviously needs to have quite a bit of material cut away. I like to use the file here just because you can remove a lot of material quickly, especially on the inside corners, and on the end it's kind of hard to do that well with a plane, just because the plane is good for long smooth movements, and this is a lot of kind of small choppy movements. So I like to use that to kind of round these corners off, both the outside and the inside corners, and then work back over this with the hand plane a little bit. Once that's done, the spokeshave is really good through some of these inside corners, just getting a nice smooth stroke as we're planing down there. Same thing here on this inside curve of the paddle between the shaft and the blade. So we'll work that a little bit with the file and then come back through it with the spokeshave as well. When you are using the spokeshave, you want to pull towards yourself, so the hand plane is mostly pushing forward movement, the spokeshave is a pulling towards you movement. It's not removing a lot of material, but it's a much smoother and more contoured way of shaping the paddle. So now we are to spokeshave phase. So I've given a little bit of contour with the file in those corners, just again to take away some of that bulk material up near the handle and then down by the blade as well. So it's still pretty rough, so we don't want to take away much more material, just mostly work on shaping and smoothing it out from here. So the spokeshave again is going to work by pulling towards you. It works well to brace it against yourself. You can kind of control the movement a little bit more, and it also helps to be able to look down the paddle, make sure that it is coming out evenly, you don't have any major bows. You can go back and forth side to side and make sure that it is coming out symmetrically as well. So if you just brace it against yourself and then pull towards you, again, this is supposed to be with two hands, but since I'm holding the phone, I'm going to show you with one. It's a lot smoother once you get that even movement. And going with the grain, when you get towards the top here, where you're working with the grain that ends in this handle, you want to pull this direction so that you're not chipping up pieces. If you go against the grain here, you're going to be chipping pieces off, but you just want to get a nice smooth movement through this corner here. This part takes a little bit longer because it is that more fine-tuned shaping, and at this point it is more aesthetic how you want those exact contours to go. I would recommend just putting your hand on it, getting a nice firm grip, see what feels good. Down here at the bottom as well, where your other hand's going to go when you paddle. If the little bit of your line is still there, that's going to come out when you sand, but you want to go for those smooth lines. And then through the blade here, you can see there's still some divots and uneven parts from the hand plane. So those you just want to work smoothly, not changing the shape overall of the paddle too much, just smoothing out any of that chipping. Again, sanding will help that a little bit, but anything that is noticeably uneven, you want to get out with the spokeshave. Alright, so after you've worked on the shaft with the spokeshave, you have a nice round shape. It's pretty even. You've looked down it from the end and made sure it was straight. Then you can work on the blade. Notice that I have this wrapped in rags before it's clamped down, being that it's a soft cedar. The clamps will actually put a mark into it, so I just wrapped a rag all the way around before clamping it down. And I'm working on the blade of the paddle now. So as much as you can, pull toward you if you need to push with the spokeshave too to get a good angle. Here, just be really careful of the grain of the wood. It'll catch depending on the direction that you're working. So just take it nice and easy. It's pretty delicate work here. If you can give a slightly convex shape between the ridge in the middle and the edge, do. Otherwise, it's just gently sloping down. And you can also use the spokeshave to kind of round off the edges here, so your Sharpie line is all the way gone. You can go straight down the edge and then kind of round that off. Same thing with the tip of the blade here, using the spokeshave to round that off. You'll notice it's still a little bit rough in some spots. That will come out mostly with sanding. The blade's getting pretty thin, so I don't want to take off too much more material smoothing it out. When you feel like it has a nice even shape, stop. Again, because the wood is so soft, it will come out pretty well. We'll start with a rougher sandpaper and then work toward a smoother sandpaper, and that will take out most of this unevenness. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do before sanding is to work on the handle grip. I'm going to focus there. So I've done a rough job with the rasp just to give it kind of the shape that I wanted, as well as just gradually tapering down from about here to the end with the hand plane. I'll let you see it from the side there, just to give it the general shape that I want. We'll work with the spokeshave now just to shape, again, pulling as much as you can, pushing if you need to, always going with the grain to give this a smoother and more contoured shape. Again, if you've got some little scratches and dings, those are going to come out with sanding, but this is kind of your last shot at getting the final shape that you want before smoothing it out. Alright, now we are to the sanding stage. Starting with 80 grit sandpaper, I went all over it once and then wetted it down. That's the discoloration here. It's just where the water has soaked in differently. Wiping it down with a wet rag raises the grain so that you get a more even sand, and it also brings out some of these little nicks and scratches that need a little bit more sanding, so it just helps you see where you need to focus sanding. So that was with 80 grit. We will do 120 grit next, and that'll be it. Alright, the very last stage is the finish. I like to use tung oil for this particular paddle. I'm not, because it developed a small split that I had to glue, and I just don't want any water to seep in and mess with that joint. So tung oil is what I would generally recommend. I've done several paddles like that. They've turned out very nicely. Just leave a few hours between coats It leaves a beautiful finish, and anytime that you need to redo it, if it's getting a little weathered, you can just sand down and use that again. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed, and good luck.